All right, Entre Architect community, we're back. It's Context and Clarity Live. We are here in our, I said it last week. I don't think we can call it our, we're back into our new fall season. We're 4 weeks in at this point. So welcome back to Context and Clarity Live at our fall season here. It's been a great ride. We've had 3 great conversations so far, and I'm pretty sure we're going to have a really fun and great conversation today as well with our special guest. If you're new around here, this is our time to focus on the things that matter most to you, the architect. Doesn't matter what your context is, and we're going to push and pull and pick at that context as well. We're going to break outside the box and really discuss things that matter most to you in your life and your work, maybe in your relationships as well. So welcome back. Glad that you're here. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Katie Kangas. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you, Jeff. It's good to be here.
I am glad that you're here. I'm trying to peek out through the door. I don't see any snow yet, but it's feeling a little bit chilly in Indianapolis. I bet it's more chilly in Minneapolis. But welcome. Happy fall.
Thank you. Yes, we've had a little frost already.
All right. Yeah. I walked to the coffee shop this morning. It was 40 degrees. And tomorrow I'll be in Colorado. And I should have been more prepared for 40 degrees because it's going to be different in Colorado tomorrow. So we may see snow on our trip out there. We'll see.
My girls would be so excited. They can't wait.
Send them. We'll pick them up at the airport. Very good. I see Erica has joined us. She is lobbying for the crocheted bathtub. We have not given away a crocheted bathtub award this season. I don't know if we've retired that or we need to come up with a new award for the person that's first in. But we're glad Erica is here. Welcome, Erica, from New Jersey, I guess. You are first in today, so glad that you're here. Jessica's joining us from Los Angeles. She said this week has been a long year. Okay. Well, hopefully we can maybe bring a little levity to that today. We'll see. We'll see where this conversation goes. And but I'm glad you're here, Jessica. Let's see. She says it's only 70.
Yeah, she'd better bring those sweats out. Gotta prepare for that cold weather in California.
Yeah, that's right.
That's also where Hiba is from. So
yeah, that might be an interesting discussion as well, right? Chicago to LA. We'll see. We'll see what that difference is like. Mark is joining us from North Carolina, and Wendy from Western Massachusetts. So welcome to all of you. And if you are on Facebook right now, and I'm gonna say Sam. I'm not willing to butcher your name, so I'm gonna say Sam is joining us from YouTube. I'm glad that you are here, Sam, and apologies for not even attempting your name there, but welcome. They say they're excited for this one, so I am too. I am, and Mark is joining us from Orange County, California. Glad that you're here. If you are on Facebook right now and you're commenting away and you say, hey, why are my comments not showing up like Erica's or like Jessica's or like Mark's or Wendy's? It's because you are in a closed Facebook group, or a private Facebook group, I guess is what Mark Zuckerberg calls it. And Mark has rules, and his rules say that your name, your likeness, your comments can't leave that group unless you give permission. So if you want to do that, and I wish that you would, open up another browser window, type chat.restream.io/FB as in Facebook. And a couple of clicks later, and you will give Facebook permission to let your name, your likeness, your comments out. So it's down in the lower left-hand corner of your screen right now, chat.restream.io/FB. And thank you, Jessica, for the lazy. Just click on the link in Jessica's comment. We should just hire somebody to do that. Thanks, Jessica. Checks in the mail.
I think we owe Jessica a paycheck for doing that a few weeks now.
Yeah, we're going to give Jessica a crocheted paycheck, and appreciate the help there. But if that's what's going on, right? If you're commenting from Facebook and it's not showing up, go to Jessica's comment there, click on it, and it should work after that. Mark wants to know if Facebook has NIL rules. Maybe if you're not familiar, that's a college sports thing. What is that? I don't remember what NIL stands for. I have this conversation with my son a lot because he plays college sports. He does not have an NIL deal, by the way, but Brave New World, that is. conversation for another day. But we're glad you're all here. I see Hermosa from Madrid. Thank you for joining us. So we've jumped the Atlantic now. That's awesome. That it's been a while since we have spread out. Well, no, Diego was here. Diego was here last week from where's Diego? Not Colombia. He's in South America somewhere. I forget. It'll come to me. But we have gone international again, so that's great. Scott Thrift is joining us from San Francisco. Glad all of you are here today. Great crowd, and you're in for a treat, I believe, today. So, if have I forgotten anything, Katie? You're the one that is here. I don't envy you trying to keep me on track, but that's part of the gig. So
Yeah, I should have some standard operating procedures written down by now and be doing the check marks.
no,
But
like I said,
I think I've covered
have
the
procedures.
basics. Yes.
Okay.
Time to
Well,
introduce Hiba. Yeah.
yeah, as long as we have the basics covered, we can
Mhm.
make it from there. All right, let's introduce our guest today. Our guest is an architect, a DEI strategist, and comedian. This is why I'm really excited about today. Who focuses on truth and authenticity in design, in mentorship, in advocacy, in comedy, and in life. She's on Crane's Chicago Business 20 Under 20, and she's also performed at Second City in Chicago, which I think is super cool. Hiba Bhatty, welcome to Context and Clarity Live.
Hello. Thanks for having
Welcome.
Hi.
me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to have you here all the way from Los Angeles today. So, we started out talking about the weather, which is, really surface stuff, according to who was it, Eleanor Roosevelt. So what's it like going back and forth, or I don't know how much you actually go back and forth, but going from Chicago to LA? Is that a weather shock for you?
For my body, yes. For my brain, no. Like my brain
Okay.
knows what it's supposed to be, but your body adjusts so quickly. So to be honest, when I landed back in Chicago, I was a complete brat. I was like, what is this? Why is it humid? And I'm Chicago through and through in my heart. So that was a little disappointing that my body betrayed me like that. So yeah, it's quite different. And ironically, me and my husband go back to Chicago during the colder months usually because
Sure.
it's like
Yeah.
around the holidays. So it
Yeah.
doesn't really make sense why we travel to Chicago when it's cold, because Chicago summers are literally the best. And I think they actually beat LA summers. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think it is quite different. And you can just tell by looking at the plants, to be honest.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It's
Definitely.
so different. Yeah.
Yeah, this is definitely true. Well, I'm glad that you're here. Now I'm glad that we have the weather, the experience. I guess it's the experience of the weather. We've got that settled. We were talking before we went live about the fact that you are a DEI strategist, and of course, the firm that you work for, Valerio DeWalt Train, who I am familiar with, being also spent a lot of years in Chicago. That was one of the sort of the stalwarts of the Chicago scene. You developed the DEI strategy, I believe, for VDT, and you're also a comedian. And I think some people might go, yeah, how do those two work together? So how do you keep those separate, or is there some way to weave those two together? And I know one's sort of professional and one's probably more hobby, but how do you weave those together in your brain? You've already talked about your body betraying on the weather.
Yeah. It's funny because I actually think architecture can also get thrown into the mix. People are like, comedy and architecture, that makes no sense.
Okay.
And I was
Okay.
just at hosting an award show, design night for Chicago.
Right.
And
Right.
I had to say jokes in front of an entire a crowd that was mixed, but mostly architect. And I remember when I walked in, I looked, I was like, these people don't look funny and they don't look like they can laugh at jokes. So it was like really nerve-wracking. So I feel like all three of those seem like they don't belong. But they actually all kind of influence each other in a way. And the more I do each of them, the more I see that they're interrelated. In terms of DE&I and comedy, I think those two are extremely related because a lot of comedy is storytelling and
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
telling your truth, right? So some
Yeah.
of my best material are the ones where I kind of dig into my culture or my upbringing. And those are the ones that get the the biggest laughs, because that's actually what evens the playing field. It brings everyone together. So when you think you might be different, that's actually you see more of the common ground between the two. And I think in terms of like advocacy in particular and comedy, I think comedy is one of the best ways to talk about very serious topics in a more like digestible and approachable way. You can teach pretty big lessons through jokes or through how you storytell about pretty serious topics in a more relatable way. And I think you can actually teach lessons a little bit better when it comes to like being funny or being relatable
Yeah.
in DE&I.
Yeah. Well, I think that relatability is the key, right? So there's another show that I do called Shadow Shorts, where it's interviews with people on the innovation side, the tech world, as it relates to AEC. And the interview I did yesterday was about focus, but we came all the way back around to storytelling and relatability, which is really interesting. We were talking about go-to-market strategies, so something completely different than most of this audience is interested in. But when it came down to how do we sell this? How do we get investors? How do we get people on board, users, all of that? It's the same thing. How do we make this, whether it's new tech or something like that, how do we make it relatable? And I do love that. I think comedy, or I love that idea, because I do think comedy is a common language in a way.
Yeah, laughing is great because everybody does it. If you can find the way to connect people through laughter, that feels really good to do that. And it definitely feels like you're connected. Like even when you watch a comedian talk about something and you laugh with them, you know nothing about them, obviously, but you feel really connected to them in that moment. And you're like, wow, we share that same thing, or we find that like our parents both do this and that's hilarious. It's definitely a way to connect. And I think relatability is huge. And especially even in architecture, connecting to the client and your community that you're designing for. Like it's all about connections. It's all about reaching like a broader community at the end of the day, all three of those, DE&I, architecture and comedy.
Yeah. Well, there's one, and I said this in the introduction, your focus or your, the thing that drives you is truth and authenticity. And I wonder about that. I'll take it the comedy direction first, but there are certainly people, I suppose, that could get up on stage and make everything up, right? All the stories that they're telling, I suppose they could fabricate everything. And there's certainly exaggeration and things like that. But having watched a lot of comedians, I think I like to believe I can tell, oh, this person is really authentic. This person, I went to a show maybe a month ago now, and it's like this guy is telling these stories, these jokes, and this is not fabricated, maybe exaggerated some, but this is straight from his life. And I think we feel that, and I think that authenticity, when we get to design, I think that's important as well. I think more people react to authenticity in that realm as well, or react positively to authenticity in that realm as well. What came first for you, architecture school or comedy?
Technically architecture school, but when I looked back on it, I was always being funny in my house with my siblings. And my parents are actually pretty funny too. So I think comedy came first. But I was able to, I think, be better at it because of architecture. Architecture school really drills into you like trying whatever. You have to build five different iterations of a model by tomorrow.
Sure. Yeah.
You just have to do it even if you can't even think it. You know what I mean? You're just constantly doing. And I think that helps in a lot of aspects in life. without like waiting for perfection or waiting for the perfect idea. You're just constantly trying to make something. And the other thing about architecture school is that it teaches you the importance of having like a product at the end. And so through architecture school, I think I was more, I made it more of an effort to create tangible comedy. Like, let me actually write sets, or let me make a video, or let me have something that shows what I'm already doing at home, but other people can enjoy, or it's actually out there in the universe. So they both influenced one another.
Yeah.
That's such a cool idea, that iteration in architecture where you just have to keep going
You
is
don't
so
have a choice.
similar to doing improv in comedy. Because if you just stop and you pause, that's the worst thing you could do. You got to just kind of like keep going, keep working, keep trying to find that angle, keep trying to find the laugh and that resonance with your connection with all these other people.
Yeah, definitely. And to your point earlier about like authenticity, I think people can spot it. I don't necessarily think I think it's, so the cool thing about comedy is there's the truthful aspect, and that's the part that relates to people. There's like the emotional aspect. That's what people are drawn to, the why of the character, like the reason why they're doing it. Or like if someone can see a reel and think, oh my gosh, I just did that yesterday in my house. Like, this is so relatable. People can spot authenticity because they can relate to it. But the cool thing also about comedy is that it's imaginative. And I think that in improv, almost everything is made up, but it's based in the relationship that you have as a character and the character that you're dealing with on stage, like your partner. So there is this amazing balance between the authentic and the truth, and then also the imaginative. And I think a lot of comedians, you can tell when they're on stage, like, oh, this is clearly not true because they're talking to a snake or something like that. I don't know, something very like fantastical about it. But it's so rooted in how a human would act that they're taking you along for the ride. And I think that is what makes it authentic, even if it's completely fantasy, you know? So there's like a balance of truth and authenticity, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're only talking about your life. It's about how do I connect with the audience in this way and imagine with them.
And isn't that at the heart of what we need to get to with DE and I? You know, it's there's I think it's easy for some of us to say, oh, here's this diversity, equity, and inclusion policy that we're developing, or however we're couching it. And that's not the point at all, right? The point is, how do I treat this other person? How do I interact? I mean, I guess to use the nomenclature, how do I interact with this other character who's not like me, has a different experience than me, et cetera, et cetera. I can see exactly where you're coming from, and how these things do fit together like that. That's kind of a beautiful analogy.
Yeah, actually, I think you even made me realize by saying like, oh, it's another character. I mean, I think that's totally true. This idea of when you're, at least in improv, when you meet someone on stage, you're supposed to have very little ego, and you're supposed to work as a team. And the goal is listening and building upon each other's ideas. So this idea of how do I take someone who maybe thinks or who you think is very different, how do we find the common ground, and how do we basically coming from a space of understanding and building upon, rather than dismissing certain aspects. So it's a really good, I mean, one of my improv teachers used to tell me, like, instead of thinking of the next line or thinking of a joke that'll make the audience laugh, actually react to what your partner said to you. And I think that in terms of communicating with people who you think are different than you, it's authentically listening. And instead of coming up with a comeback, it's, oh, let me actually hear what you just said, and let me respond to what the words that actually came out of your mouth. So there is definitely a sense of connection and unknown, but also being in an environment that you're hopefully making it safe for people to share and then connect through it.
Yeah. No, that's where you have to get to, right? To get to the yes and part, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
the listening, having the safe place so that I guess if I'm, for those of you, all right, we're getting into the improv nomenclature here, but yes and is one of the keys, right, of improv. And it seems to me that if we were to move that over to DE and I, then I've got to listen so that I can respond in that way, and that would set up a safe place, right? If I'm yes, I'm going to work with you here. Literally, yes, I'm going to work with you here. Yes, and here's what we can do. Okay, now you've got me fascinated.
Mhm. One other thing is like taking it a step further, and I don't know if it's maybe a little more comedy though, but one of our teachers taught us, instead of yes, or in addition to yes and, yes because. And
Mm,
so it's like you are already building the foundation that you're together. So if your partner is like, "Oh, look at that walrus over," that's a bad example, but like I feel so sad about our party being canceled, and it's like, yeah, can't believe mom. You know what I mean? Like you're saying yes and you're adding to the idea, but you're saying the reason
yeah,
why. So you're
yeah,
building the context, and you're
together.
basically, yeah,
Mhm.
you're developing the scene. And the because part I thought was actually a pretty big game changer, because it's not like, yes, and here's my idea. It's like, let me take your idea and we're going to literally build off of it. And I'm going to help you establish the foundation.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I like that. I have not heard that before, and I think that is more powerful. And I think if we think about architecture, right? We'll take another little detour, slight little veer left, but um, that's what architecture is too, right? When we're working with the community, we're working with the client, the user, whatever the context of the project is. Yes, because it's fascinating.
So a lot of us feel this out, this sort of like, how much do you give authentically to be able to make that connection happen? But you also do all this mentorship. And so you have to also verbalize this process to be able to train future architects to be able to do this. So, how do you start to look at that balance? How do you start to say, okay, you share this much of yourself, and that's that authentic voice that you're bringing forward, but also you're across the table, your partner, your character that you're across from is from such a different context. Here is how you can generously bring them in and bring that connection to a reality.
I with mentoring, and you bring up like a really good point. It's like, well, yeah, how do you teach people how to share from themselves and also like make a connection, because at the end of the day architects are building for other people. Your job as an architect is to learn about like the community or the client or the people that you're building for, but it's also to be the imagination behind how you can take it to the next level, because we are trained as thinkers of design. So when I mentor, I really try to teach my students how to view, like how to ask questions or how to think outside the box, because it's one thing to say, for example, oh, I'm working, on an office space, and it's like, well, how much square footage do you need for an office? Like we can be trained in that, like almost anyone can be trained in that part. But the thing that I try to teach my students is, how do you, one, bring yourself authentically to the table, so you're not like afraid of sharing ideas from your upbringing or your cultural background. And then two, how do you think of it in a more holistic sense, or a bigger approach? And a lot of the questions that I ask my clients tend to not technically have anything to do with architecture. It'll be more about how do you use the space, more about like human interaction. Um, for example, we did a project um, about, for our students. We did a theoretical project about like a playscape for the future, and the um, prompt was basically, how do you build a playground for the future, a playscape for the future. And instead of focusing on like, okay, what tangible thing can we put here, or like what structure should it be, it was a lot of, well, how do you imagine? What are synonyms of imagine? How do different ages play? what was a really strong memory for you as a child when you had to imagine something, or how did you connect with someone else when you played with them? What energizes you? What takes away energy? Things like that. And through asking questions like that and really getting to know the people that you're building for, oh, this is like how they think, how they live, how they interact, you'll usually find something that's like a gem that will propel your design forward. And then you can obviously add the technical stuff. How to design, the space that needs to accommodate it, but that sort of getting to know the people that you're building for in that way, when you're asking questions that don't feel like they relate to architecture, I think that's how some of the strongest projects get made. And in terms of being authentic to who you are, I think, like, for example, I think one of my students is actually on the line, Ben Kataka. So shout out to him. He's one of the students I mentored, and I'll use him as an example. We did a gastronomic center, so a place where you would teach people about food and get food, and whatever that means. And the students built out this whole project, and they did an excellent job. And he's an excellent drawer, and he would draw these very whimsical, almost like Dr. Seuss-esque forms. And instead of being like, well, that doesn't fit, it's like, you're really good at this, and this is how your brain thinks, and I want you to draw what our building should be. And he did. We had him do hand sketches, and he brought all of his really cool ideas. Yeah, really cool ideas to the table, and we got an award for it. And it's because we saw, different advantages from different people. And there was another student who literally talked about, well, I learn all my cooking on Instagram. And we do that, but we wouldn't think about that immediately. And we're like, oh, there's this whole generation that's learning in a completely different way. And so if you just kind of say, well, you're too young to have an idea, I'm not really going to listen to you, instead of being like, well, this is what my family does, or this is how me and my classmates think, or just not being afraid to say how you live, or being like, well, I spent every Sunday learning with my grandma because we didn't have access to what, you know what I mean? Like, those things make for an end product that's more authentic to the community and brings more ideas to the table. Because the last thing you want is everyone thinking the same. And so the sooner I think that you realize that, oh shoot, my idea is a little different, and I'm actually kind of scared to share it because everyone else is thinking in this certain way, but you have the courage to actually share it. You'd be surprised, like, managers want that. They want new ideas because they're like, oh shoot, we didn't think about that before. This will make our project stronger. So I try to teach my students, don't be afraid of, any of these things that might be holding you back. Think about your life and how you went through life and how it would impact the building that you're making, or what questions you would ask, or how you would connect to the community when you're asking, when you're on a team and you're trying to figure out what type of building to make. I think that's really, really important. And you connect with people better that way, and they're able to share, how they use the space more genuinely.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I wonder, how hard is it? Because it takes a lot of courage.
Mm-hmm.
I think back to, times in my life. Of course, it's, in certain, when we're in certain phases of our life, certain ages, middle school or something like that, you want to be like everybody else. And, you
Yeah.
go through these types of phases. So, but even as adults, it can take a lot of courage, I think, to the way that you just said it a minute ago. It's like, oh, everybody's kind of thinking in this way, but I'm thinking
Yeah.
in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So how hard is it to teach that, or what do you have to do to draw that out of people?
That's a really good question. And I don't know if I have the answer, because I will say that's something that I even struggle with sometimes. I think if you're in an environment where everyone's thinking one way and you're thinking different, it's the easiest approach is to blend in, and also like want to, and those ideas that tend to be along the same wavelength get praised more too. So you'll get more attention for probably not sticking out, and you'll probably be recognized for not sticking out. And then you kind of learn in that way. I think architecture school is like that. There's like a certain type of architecture that we learn, And then you realize I can be successful if I do this type of thinking, but it's not really true to who you are. And so it's kind of like, it's like code switching, but for design. It's like I'm designing for a certain
Yeah.
crowd. I'm designing for a certain type of people, but I'm not including my people in it, or I'm not really including me in it. So it's realizing, I think, the strength that you have in being you and in being individual. And a lot of times that comes from practice, because once you do it enough times, you realize, hey, wait a minute, my designs are good if I design them like this, the way I want to, but you don't really know it until trial and error. And I think a really a way to help people is also mentoring people in that way. If you have someone above you that's looking out for you, that's welcoming you for those differences, that makes a big change too. But it's hard to do it in a world where it's not really working in your favor. And I'll like bring it to comedy to give like a really easy example. When I'm in improv and I have my partner across from me and they put me in a scene of, I don't know, staying out late, and we come home and our parents are gonna greet us at the door. I think when I'm on stage, because my partner is probably not a Pakistani American Muslim, I'm like, okay, I need to come up with a line that they'll get so I don't let my improv partner down. Because if I go too specific to what I'm thinking, then they might not get it. And also the audience might not laugh. So I'm thinking, what would a typical American say in this situation rather than what I would say? And in that way, then I'm not really being authentic, but I'm being a team player. And it's hard because in that situation, because you have responsibilities to your team and, all of that. But that's like I think that's a good example, because it's like a tricky predicament. You want to help everybody out, but you also are kind of masking yourself. And that happens in architecture a lot too, because the fastest and easiest way to success is thinking in a certain way.
Sure.
So it's difficult. But what I do try to teach my students is when we have those conversations, when we're brainstorming, when we're trying to figure out the program or schematic design for our theoretical project, I really try to ask, and I see them doing it too. I'll ask a question and they'll answer in like a typical way that like a high school teacher would want you to respond. And I'm like, no, like actually think about your experience. Like what happened? Like, and I try to encourage those conversations so they make the connection between this is how I live my life and this is how it can translate to design, or this is how it can translate to an idea or a concept. These are the type of questions that I ask. Like I'm trying to get them to think, these are the type of questions that I ask to get to a concept or a thesis. And this is how I would have to package it in order to narrate it to somebody else, in a way that like still considers all of those things. So mainly, I mean, I don't know if I have an answer to be like, go out and do this and you can do it. But so maybe I should think about that answer. And I don't know. I mean, go ahead.
Well, I mean, you talked about, the answering the way that a high school teacher would want you to
Yeah.
answer. I mean, there's an awful lot of programming that goes on when we're young. Well, even as adults, I mean, it's I would argue it still continues. So maybe the answer is to bring improv into architecture school. I'm
Yeah,
thinking
we
of
actually. Mhm.
I'm thinking of the people that are in our audience that are educators. Um, I don't teach studio. I teach pro practice in a different way, but a studio based on improv, I think could be fascinating.
We actually make all of our students, we do improv with them in the beginning, and
Nice.
it's fun. It's good. And also I think in terms of just public speaking, because that's such a big skill, is to stand up there and say what's on your mind. That basically helps with getting over the shyness of, it's like it's okay to say what's on your mind. I think that's the biggest lesson. You're not going to hurt anybody by doing it. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like the world's not going to crumble. one of my improv teachers, this could be taken the wrong way, but she said it in a really nice way. She's like, who do you think you are, basically, to think like the world ended because of your one like
Yeah.
flub on stage? Like, it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, but she said it in a loving way, where it's like, it's okay to make mistakes.
Yeah.
It's okay to have a bad joke here and there, and the world's not going to end. Think about it for as long as your set is, which is like 10 minutes, and then get over it and move on. So yeah, I think, well, okay, my step, I guess this is what I would be to give advice on that is try to spend time making things that make you happy and not somebody else, and practice your skills in that way. And realize that the things that you bring to the table are a strength or an asset. And that just comes with kind of like skill and practice and craftsmanship, and being okay. And the other thing in architecture too is it's always a team sport. Sometimes you might come to the table thinking, I have literally the best idea and I know it. And then it doesn't get chosen, and then you're okay with it. But just to come with the idea, like not being afraid to come with the idea, because most likely your project manager is probably going to tell you no, or there might be one designer in the firm that's going to dictate everything anyways, but at least you're getting the practice of saying it, of taking up space, of pitching it. So I think one thing, just try to do that like once this week. If you're in the office and you have an idea, don't be afraid to share it. And it's okay.
There we go.
Yeah.
Challenge accepted, hopefully, from those listening.
Yeah.
There's a term you used called code switching. I actually don't know what that means or what context that term comes from.
So a lot of the times it's, for example, if you have a way that you speak at home with your community, but then you change it to fit in with the majority of the people around you. For example, at work, you speak in a different way to be taken more seriously, or it's a switch that you do because you have to fit in with a certain crowd, and it takes, emotional energy and all of that. So, and it's also a way for you to kind of, it makes it more helpful for you to like succeed in an environment that doesn't really accept you, but it also is a way of kind of hiding yourself too in the process. So that's kind of why I used it. It's not necessarily the correct term in this context, because we're talking more about action or designing. But so code switching is more for language. But when I was trying to think of a term, I was like, I think that's the closest one I can think of. And it's essentially, just you're basically thinking and designing for someone outside of yourself at the end of the day when you do that. And it takes away from you developing like, oh, what makes me unique? I mean, there's no other person like you in the world, right? No one else has your experiences. Even if I have a sister that I'm really close to. I talk about this all the time. We basically have all of the same experiences, but we're two completely individual people. So there's no one else like you. And if you're not going to, and you're also like blessed with all of these different things that have happened to you in your life. So how do you bring that to the table? You got to have your own voice for that. You can't expect someone else to speak for you. So that's kind of the part about being authentic to yourself and saying, if I don't do it, no other Hiba will. You know what I mean? Like, no, there's no other Jeff to do it or Katie to do it. It's just you. And
but that does come back to bravery and being courageous and finding that confidence in your own voice.
Improv does help with that. I think improv helps with that, and also finding something that you can take ownership in. And by that, I'm not talking about building a whole business, but for example, people who are in the architecture office, what's something at the office that you can kind of claim as your own? And for me, it was mentoring. That was like my baby. But other people can, plan CEU and lunch and learns. They can have this other thing where they're like, I'm going to teach this boot camp in Rhino. You can have something that's yours and that you develop and that you share. And over time, when you do it, you're like, yeah, dang, I did that. Like, that makes you feel good about yourself. And that shows, it's like these baby projects that are your own, and they help build that confidence. So I think that's helpful.
Yeah, I think there's I don't know if irony is the word I want, but I often, when code switching comes up, one thing that pops into my mind a lot, especially sort of in the way that we're using it here, is you're being a chameleon, kind of in a way, right? I'm blending in, I'm changing so that I match everybody else, and I look at some of the students that I teach, and you see, and this isn't an indictment on students or anything like that. I think it's sort of an age and experience thing, maybe, but I also know adults that are the same. But the wanting to fit in piece, the wanting to be the same piece, sometimes lack of self-awareness can certainly be a part of that. But I also, you've mentioned being part of a team, right? If pick a sport or a performing arts or whatever it is, it's very, very rare that we need a team where everybody is the same and everybody has the same skill sets. It's more likely that I need everybody that's on this team to play to their strengths and to be willing, not only doing that, but being willing and enthusiastic about playing to their strengths, because that's what they bring, right? That's the advantage that they bring to the team. Now, it's really easy for me to sit here and say that, right? Again, back to the courage piece of it. But I, for if there are students out there that are listening, or young people, or otherwise, I think that's important to understand. And many of us grow up with all kinds of baggage. Some of it that we've created, we've imagined on our own, and some of it's not. But it's important for us to understand that uniqueness. I think as long as we can get into that yes because, or we get into the yes because, that I think that's where the magic is. That's how we can do this together. And I think ultimately that's what's important about all of these different topics that we're talking about.
And I think it also, team is a great word because architecture is completely team based. And also people are probably project managers. And it's like, well, how do you make a team want to do what you need them to do?
Yeah.
And to your point, I think in terms of just like in general, like employee engagement, and especially like after the pandemic and just getting people excited to do stuff, I think a lot of it has to do with getting everyone aligned on a shared goal. And then it's like, well, let me have you each play to your strengths and figure out how do we get to that goal together.
Yeah.
So there is an idea of being the best version of yourself, which is individual, but you're also working towards a team goal. And so that's the cool balance. But yeah, when I think about, how do I want, what is the strongest team that I want? And I would never pick people that are exactly like me, because it would not make us stronger, so that's a good point.
It's right back to improv. Right? It's
always, improv is pretty simple in that way that it can tie into everything just because of that yes and portion. I highly recommend everybody take it. It's nice and it's freeing in a way that there's so many like rules that society puts on you, or like people around you, that it doesn't feel that free sometimes. And so this idea of just being able to just not go in with any practice and just be and say, and whatever's within you is within you, and whatever you're going to say in that moment is what it is. Like our teacher was like, whatever you say is like meant to be. Like there's no mistake. There are literally no mistakes that you can make. And so it's basically a great exercise in getting out of your head and building a confidence where you don't care what other people think. And you also are not, like less harsh on yourself. You can't be like, oh, that was so stupid that I mean, like maybe in the beginning, but like over time you're like, yeah, I don't care that I didn't get a laugh because I think it's funny. And that's totally okay. That didn't resonate with the audience. You just care a little less about what people think, which I think is it's really hard to get to, but it's a really great quality to have. Um, so
Do you always think it's funny?
so whenever I whenever I write a joke initially, I'm like, this is a good topic and I know it. And then I'll like reread it a million times. And how I work is like I type and then I print out and then I scratch out and then I rewrite and then it's very like back and forth. And then somehow it just gets in my brain and it's memorized. But after like the 15th time of practicing something, I'm like, oh shoot, is it still funny? Because it's the 15th time that I've heard that joke.
Yeah.
So there is definitely a sense of like, yeah, this joke can bomb on stage. Like there's a very good percentage that it might not get the laugh. But I think, and that's, me and it's in my head. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes like one crowd will laugh entirely at your joke. And then you'll
Mhm.
say the same joke in front of another crowd and they won't. I did this one stand-up set at the Taste of Korea in Chicago.
Okay.
And the front row was all really cute old Asian grandmothers. And they didn't know any English. And I was like, this is going to be a tough crowd. But I was like, but it is what it is. Like, my jokes probably won't resonate with them, but I still did it and I still had a great time, So, yeah, there are going to be times when your joke does not hit. And I think also part of it is acknowledging that and like making fun of yourself on stage for it too. Because then people are like, yeah, we can all relate that joke didn't hit, right? So we can all laugh about that. And then you're on the same page again.
Yeah.
So there is, writing. That's why it's always good to like test in front of an audience too. A lot of comedians will go to open mics and test their material before a really big event because you need to make sure that you're writing the joke in a way that will get the laugh. But yeah, I think the truth is whenever people start writing the joke, they think it's going to be good, but depending on the wording, it can go downhill.
So if the judge of good comedy is the laugh, what is the measuring stick for good architecture? What are you looking for?
Yeah. So I think everyone has a different opinion. I think at the base of it, architecture that makes you feel something.
Mhm.
I think in general, yeah, you can hate a piece of architecture, but I guess in terms of just feeling something when you walk into the space, because anybody can just like it's easy to just put program where it needs to go. But giving someone something to talk about, I think is the base level. But I also think having architecture that can be understood by the community. And many ways it's like, can you diagram your building? Can you make your concept? And I use concept and thesis like pretty interchangeably. Even when I teach my students, I'm like, architecture is very much like writing a paper. You need to have a thesis, which is a concept, and then you build upon it. So like, can your concept or your main idea, for those of you who aren't architects, can it be understood by a person who's there without you explaining it? So I tend to like buildings that if I were a student and my teacher was like, go draw a diagram of what that building means, and I'm able to do it, I think that's successful because I figured it out. The architect didn't tell me that, it's supposed to be a big block on four, you know what I mean? It's like, I figured it out. I can, without your help. And I think that's really important to me because I think that one, it means you thought of a concept in the first place, and then you were actually able to implement it and people can understand it. And it can be, and the best are the ones that have a concept but resonate completely with the community that you're building it for. So this is an example, but Beinecke Library on Yale campus. I don't know if you know, it's SOM building. It's basically like a concrete block that's levitating over like this glass little box on the inside, and they chiseled the stone so thin that light penetrates and it like glows on the inside. And you can tell as a student, okay, clearly the books need to be protected so they can't have sunlight. So that's why they did what they did. But it's so beautiful, and they manipulated the stone so well that it doesn't feel like you're in a concrete like silo. So you clearly talk to the people who are using the building. We can't have light touch. You know what I mean? So it's like you did the research, you figured out what makes sense, and then you made it beautiful, because that's your job as the architect. You made it beautiful, and you made it something that people, and it's experiential too. So I think if you hit those three, that's the mark.
It seems to me if you have to explain the design, it's a little bit like having to explain the joke, and that would not be a
Yeah,
good thing.
yeah, exactly. It should be that your job as the architect or the comedian, you're doing the work so that the people can enjoy it and understand it without you having to explain it. That's totally true.
Yeah. Well, I think that litmus test of an architecture that makes me feel something. I was thinking about that as you said it. I have that same test for a lot of things, music, art, so maybe it's all in that same realm. I'm not sure, but yeah, wouldn't that make life better if everything that we encountered and experienced made us feel something, or we were focused on what? On experience, I guess, rather than thing.
And that's how
That
people
that's
connect, through
mhm.
feelings. That's like the biggest, strongest way to connect with people, is through emotion. I think if you can do that with architecture, that's incredible. Like, you can imagine just take any piece of architecture that you walk into, and everyone who walks in is like, whoa. You don't know the
Mhm.
person who's to the left of you or to the right of you, but you're both like, yo, are you seeing that? You're already connected in that way, creating that sort of shared space and that shared feeling. I think that's really a powerful experience.
Yeah. Yeah, bringing it all back around, right? Making it relatable. Or if I feel something, you feel something, Katie feels something, we may all feel something slightly different, but we can relate to the space, the experience, the joke, the fill in the blank.
It's like
Yeah.
watching a movie. It's like watching a movie, and afterwards you're like, what do you want to talk about for the movie? If people could visit buildings, and there are some buildings that I'll visit and then I'll leave and I'll be with people who aren't even architects. And it's like, so what did we think? It was a building that was that cool or powerful that you have to talk about it when you leave. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Quite a standard.
Good luck. No, I'm just kidding. It's
Yeah.
hard to do, of course, but
Mhm.
I'm just thinking about places that I love to visit, and places that really stick out to me, and buildings that have had an impact on me, in that way. And I think those are the ones that I find most enjoyable. And I think it'd be cool if we strived in a little bit. I mean, maybe your budget doesn't allow it, but you try a little bit, to make someone.
Yeah. But how all right. I get it, right? I get where we're going here, but how much does it cost to create experience, right? How
I
much does it's space. We're creating space.
The thing is, I think you can do it without money, though, if you do the
Mhm.
research properly.
Yeah, I agree.
I think you pick and choose your battles, because we all know what value engineering is. And,
Mhm.
so you pick moments, and maybe your whole building doesn't, but maybe a moment in your building does,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
or maybe it is in the layout, and you figured it out in the layout, and you really don't need that much, you know, glitz and glam in the other parts of it.
mhm,
So I think obviously, like when you build like when you visit a world renowned building, you might not have the budget to do that. Of course, we
yeah,
all know that. But on a smaller scale, I think you can pick where it counts and what to do in that small portion.
yeah. And there are people listening right now that, my client won't go for this, that, or the other. So we're getting back to that realm of courage and storytelling, and how can you make this how can you make it important for your client? How can you convince your client that it's important? I don't know the right way to
That's the
approach that
biggest.
necessarily.
I mean, that's the biggest thing about storytelling in architecture is convincing your client.
Mhm.
If
Yeah.
you just show them, oh, this is what we're thinking. And they don't know the story behind it, or, your customer said this. That's where we're building our whole idea from. This will actually influence your business in a positive way. You have to build the story to convince them. And yeah, they might not pick the entirety of the design, or you might edit it. But that idea of storytelling, I cannot emphasize enough, is so important in any of your presentations to your clients. Having that skill to back up what you made in a human way, like in a way that literally will affect them, I think is really important, and really positive way to get the clients on the same page, but also figure out the essence of what needs to be done.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm running our startup incubator right now. There are 11 teams going through the incubator, and we talk about this, and we'll talk about it more because they're headed towards demo day in 3 weeks, I think it is. And we can often think of the glitz and the glam, as you said earlier, in their world, in startup world. It's all glitz and glam. It's all AI. It's all this tech. It's all, it's all focused on AEC. So some of it's project management, some of it's BIM, some, these different things. But you can't go in and rely on, oh, well, we've got AI. Every single team has AI. So how do the storytelling becomes incredibly important. We can think of that as such a basic, primitive human thing. And maybe that's why it's even more important in this high-tech AI tech startup world. Those two have to work together, or they're not going to. This makes it sound pretty heavy, but they're not going to survive.
Yeah, it's a lot like UX research. It's like, how do you connect with the consumer, the client? It's literally how architecture is and how we view it. And I think the one big tip that I would have for people who are becoming an architect is try to learn how to write concisely and to prove a point, because that will help you in how you present and how you think as a designer too.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, and you mentioned UX, user experience design. That's architecture.
It is 100%.
Yeah, absolutely, it is. It's the one thing that's been tickling my brain the whole time is, you've talked about yes because there is what's his name, Randy Olson, worked for NASA. Are you familiar with Randy Olson? Oh shoot, it just went out of my head. But therefore, is that how it goes? His basically his 3-step storytelling process that he learned from South Park.
Yeah.
Everybody learned that. You can tell your story in a sentence. Yeah. Using what is it? It's and but. Yeah, and but therefore, right?
Yeah, it's like, what is the problem and how to solve it, essentially.
Yeah, it's oftentimes we did this and we did this and we did this and we did this. Well, that's not a story, right? That's a list of activities. We did this and we did this, but then this happened, so we had to, or therefore we had to do this, and that becomes a story, right? It's one sentence, and it to me it's pretty closely related to yes because or yes and. It's how do we build these stories and how do we collaborate? Which is, we haven't even used that word, I don't think, in this whole hour that we've been talking. But
we use teamwork.
It is teamwork. Yes, it's just another word for it. But this is fascinating. I'm really really enjoying this. We could keep going for a long time, I think. But thanks so much for bringing these lessons and your experiences to this, and the encouragement to have courage. And also to take an improv class. So,
do it. Thank you so much for having me. And I had so much fun talking about all of these topics with you too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great. We might have to have you back, and we'll dig deeper into some of these. It'd be fun.
Yeah, I'm always down to nerd out. So
Right on. And for those of you that are in our audience, thank you for joining us today. It's been great having you here. for our fourth week, I think, of our fall
Mhm.
season of Context and Clarity Live. We'll be back next week with Andrew McConnell, I think, if I'm not mistaken. He will be our guest, talking about mindfulness in business. Not unrelated to some of the things that we've touched on here today.
Good.
So that Sam says, please have her back. All right, you're on.
Yes,
We'll have
thank
to
you,
make
Hiba.
that happen. Yeah,
Thank you so much.
absolutely. Yeah, and absolutely encourage. I said this before we went live. There's a strong possibility that I am going to take an improv class. I'm challenging you all to do the same. If you've never done that before, I when I'm out on the public speaking circuit, I spend a lot of time studying stand-ups because of their timing and their storytelling. It really helps me being present on stage. But I've never done an improv class, and I think I'm going to do that. So that's my challenge to all of you. Take an improv class, figure out how to bring that into your personal life, but also your professional life. I think it could greatly improve the profession. So thanks, Hiba. Thanks, Katie. Thanks to all of you out there. And we will see you next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Until then, have a great week. See you later.
Thank you.